Ontological shock on the greatest scale humanity has ever seen in history is hitting us right now. It's not something that happened or will happen. It's something that is happening right now. And it's very, very important to, as an individual as well as a community, look at this phenomenon, what it means, and how to go about moving forward. So today I wanted to discuss this ontological shock. What is it? Here I've written down that the foundational ideas that underpin your reality are shown to either be untrue or are suddenly misunderstood, or they're unintegrated in some way. That could be one of the more basic ways to define ontological shock, right? Ontology is the study of what exists. And ontological shock is when you're not sure what that existence means, what it is, how to move forward in it. And so when it hits an individual, obviously you enter existential crisis. But what happens when it happens on a cultural scale, on a societal scale, and on a global scale? Those three things are actually different. Culturally speaking, it's still isolated from other cultures where it's not an issue. If you have ontological shock in a societal scale, same thing. You are isolated from other societies. However, when there's a globalization of culture and of society through, the virtual worlds that we've become connected to, then any kind of ontological shock kind of reverberates throughout all of the planets and all of the societies and all of the communities and all of the individuals. So this is a very, very dangerous thing. And obviously, we've discussed the dangers of AI, we've discussed the dangers of nuclear war, famine, things like that. But very, very rarely do we discuss these more abstract dangers because we don't think in those terms that much. And we don't have reason to really think. If people start to lose their sense of belief in reality and in purpose, then it's not that big of a deal. In fact, it is the biggest deal. The whole reason nuclear war is a danger or corruption is a danger on a scale that can cause famines and things like that is precisely because people lose their way. There's no purpose for them in society or in reality anymore. So they turn towards self-destruction. Generally, what happens is there's a loss of shared values. That's the kernel of the problem. And when you don't have shared values as a community, as a species, then there's no way to orient yourself in order to create order. It's pure chaos. So another thing that's important is to realize that values regulate our emotional selves. We are rational creatures as well, but we are very easily overruled by our emotions, our instincts, and so we need some set of fundamental values to cling on to and to integrate in such a way that allows us to have that order and maintain that order so that we don't fall into chaos, right? So yeah, loss of shared values puts you in survival mode. It's just everyone for themselves. It's me for myself. And survival mode is primal behavior. Primal behavior means tribalism. It means being selfish, being short-sighted, all the things that really we have overcome as a species up to now because we've realized that it's when we come together, it's when we work together as a unit that things work, that we're able to survive. Because we are by no means the most intelligent, although we've convinced ourselves that we are, or the strongest or fastest species on the planet. We're not the most efficient either. So we have to think about all this stuff. And ontological shock, it's a big deal. It's a big issue. So let's just be clear about this right now. Violence is the result of ontological shock, okay? Loss of shared values kicks in survival mode, which is primal behavior, kicks in violence. And you might think to yourself, well, I don't feel that way. You're thinking that now, but you're an individual, and when you're part of the group dynamics, when you're thrust within the group in a dynamic that takes over, it sort of hacks your individual sense of rationality, you'd be surprised just how far you'd go and the things you would do that you normally wouldn't do under other circumstances. So you have to realize that this impacts you as an individual. So the question is, okay, why is this ontological shock happening? It's been blowing up the internet for a while now, and it's increasingly becoming more important because people are starting to feel the pain, right? Things like AI. Why is ontological shock happening? Globalization, which disrupts culture and economy. AI plus robotics plus biohacking, which disrupts purpose and identity directly. Then we have aliens, which disrupts ontological belief systems on a deep level. That's aliens as well as space travel. Now, it's not that aliens have to exist. They could be completely fake. It's enough and sufficient for people to believe that there are aliens or life out there in the universe, and that will disrupt a lot of our ontological belief systems, religion, in other words. Okay, and the final one is demographic collapse. The fact that there's not enough people on the planet to keep things going, that can rob you of your purpose and put you into existential crisis just there. We have to talk about this. So let's start with the globalization, because we already kind of did that in the introduction here. It disrupts culture and economy for a reason. Think about it this way. We all think diversity is a strength. That's been drummed into us for a while now, and it is to a certain degree. You can look at it on the biological level, for example. If you have diverse sets of genes, your offspring that gets produced is more stable, right? So it's good. Interracial marriages and having children interracially is healthy for the gene pool, for example. So this works on multiple levels of analysis. However, culture, even though it crosses these genetic boundaries, it's kind of ironic that cultures between each other should not have boundaries being crossed too much. What I mean by that is if you have an influx of a certain people who have a certain set of values and culture that comes into an area with another different contradictory culture, then obviously we see chaos. So this is basic stuff. We know this. The problem is proximity. And that proximity is changing and has changed because of globalization on a cultural level, due to the internet, due to TV, due to radio. We've been able to communicate and share culture, and that's created one more homogeneous culture across the planet. You can have someone in Mauritania listening to hip hop from South Korea, right? So it's very interesting how cultural boundaries have dissolved because of these technologies. And in part, culture is that. It is a mixture. And that's what culture is. It's a proliferation of mixtures of different ideas and cultures, and it generates a new culture. And that's beautiful, but there are limits to everything. And that limit has been exacerbated by physical crossing of those boundaries, mass immigration, right? From peoples in a certain part of the world to another part where the values are incompatible. And so the disruption of culture is quite clear, and it disrupts the economy as well. When people who are wealthy, or not even that wealthy, on one side of the planet go to another side where everything is cheap and the currency exchange is in their benefit, it disrupts the economy in the local level, right? You have a lot of Canadians leaving Canada because you have a lot of Europeans and Asians coming and inflating the job market or the housing market. And then Canadians decide to move out and they go to South America where they're doing the same thing there, right? So this is an issue, and this issue is not going to get better just like that, right? So I'm just stating the problems here. I'm not arriving at the solutions yet, but that's globalization for you. It disrupts basically because there's a lack of balance and of integration that can happen on a level that's more gradual and smooth. There's no time for integration, in other words. The second thing is AI paired with robotics. Robotic companies are now starting to launch their campaigns showing that they're being able to produce on larger scales faster. You have Neo by the company X1, who has launched their home robotics product. So this person can, I'm already personifying these robots, and we will personify them. But these robots, these people, will be in your home doing the laundry, making you coffee, doing all these little tasks and chores that are kind of boring and banal, and you won't be needing to waste any time on those things anymore. All right. Then you have the robotics that are taking care of more heavy manual labor, like in agriculture, like in factories. Of course, we don't think of cars as being robots, but they are, and they're self-driving. And that's a massive amount of jobs, right? I think it's in the millions in the United States, for example, of people who have driving as a career. So we're being displaced in many, many ways. And this is not new stuff, so I don't want to get into it too much. But that disrupts our purpose quite directly. People tie their purpose to what they do. And yes, you could say on one side, it's a positive thing. It leaves you free to do what you love. Uh, But the question is, what do I love to do? When for the last 10 years, I've been studying this and doing that. And sure, maybe I hadn't spent that much time discovering who I am to maybe really find the most ideal job that I want because I had pressures from my parents or from the need to survive, whatever it is. The point is, people are going to be forced into this need to understand what they want and how to align themselves with this new world that's happening very, very quickly. All right. I want to talk about biohacking. Biohacking is essentially a literal transformation of our physical, corporeal selves. You are no longer going to be human at some point. At what point do species change? I'm no biologist here. However, there are two terms, there's ontogeny and phylogeny. I think one has to do with the evolution of a species, the other one has to do with the evolution of the individual person within that species. And we're able to tailor ourselves as individuals. That's where personal medicine will come in, for example. You have some kind of disease, we're going to make sure that you have the best medicine that's tailor fitted for you specifically to your genetic profile. So there's a lot of benefits, and we're hoping for all these beautiful things. But we have to think about the downstream effects. What happens when you decide to tailor yourself to be much more intelligent or have purple eyes or grow a tail? We see people using plastic surgery for many, many different reasons that are aesthetic now, right? They want to transform and shape themselves into something that they feel best represents their identity or where they want their identity to go. And this can be very dangerous, as we've seen. So what happens when you're messing with this stuff on a genetic level? This is going to mess not only with your identity and your self-perception, but how people perceive each other. And we may very well split into multiple species of sapiens that are too difficult to categorize. How do you classify an ongoing, very fast genetic transformation of a species? That's never happened in the history of humanity or of nature of life, as a matter of fact. This is going to disrupt things in ways that we can't even conceptualize. Then we have aliens and space travel. Now, look, it's sufficient enough for us to believe that there's life out there in the universe. We don't even need it to be proven or have evidence. As we are seeing this coming out more and more in the news, and the government is coming out to say these things, and they could be saying these things as a red herring to distract us from something else. Doesn't matter. The point is, those effects can also have effects that no one really wants, such as ontological shock. The kind of ontological shock that happens when you have life forms on this planet or in the universe, you have to start to reorganize how you're perceiving the nature of reality, the meaning of your metaphysical framework, whether it's religious on one level or another. This reaches you deep down for a couple of different reasons. One of them is that no one really spends very much time discussing and thinking about their own metaphysical assumptions. If you grew up integrated with this idea that everything is alive, it's called animism, and everything is imbued with spirits, then it might not be so difficult for you to accept there's life out there in the universe. But if a billion people on the planet believe that there is no life elsewhere in the universe and that life is imbued with a soul only at the human level and animals don't even have souls, what happens when all of a sudden you don't even believe it as an individual, but all of a sudden society around you completely adopts the idea that there's intelligent life in the universe elsewhere, and all of a sudden it changes how it operates? You're having to adapt to that, even though you don't believe in it. So it's just a very, very deep thing because, again, people don't even really know if they've secured themselves in these ideas to begin with. They just go on with their everyday lives. All right, so we have a lot of ontological shock to face here on so many levels. And space travel, it's relevant to ontological shock because when we start to leave the planet, we go to Mars or we set up base on the moon, and we think of it as science fiction now, but I think people are starting to clue into the fact that science fiction turns into science facts very, very quickly. So it is possible to imagine that in 50 years from now, there are colonies on the moon, people working on the asteroid belt, mining for resources, and perhaps even a colony on Mars, where there's a Martian culture, a Martian politics, a Martian economy, and there's relationship to the Earth in that way. And then all of a sudden we start to really change our ontological perspectives as to what it means to live in this universe when we are multiplanetary. I'm not saying one thing is good or one thing is bad, or that these things are something we should move towards or away from. I'm just trying to state how it can possibly disrupt our sense of identity, our sense of purpose. And again, because this is a natural process, people go through existential crisis. It's just that we've never had to face it on such a scale before together as a species, consciously. So space travel is also one of those things. And the final one is demographic collapse. We've seen this weird trend where people, even though they're becoming more and more successful and have more and more money, for some reason it becomes more expensive to have children, and it's not sustainable and it's not desirable. So this is happening even in third world countries that are developing, and they're leapfrogging us even in their economic growth. And the birth rate is slowing there as well. So there's films like Children of Men that really elaborates the kind of existential shock that humans and societies can enter when they realize, hey, there's no one to carry on my culture, to carry on these ideas and the purpose of humanity here, of life in the universe. What's the point? And it becomes very depressing, and there's this downward spiral. Okay, so demographic collapse causes an immense amount of pressure because we don't really feel it. There's a collapse. It's the opposite. We feel there being more people on the planet because people are migrating to places where there's more work, where there's more people, in other words. And that leaves there more of a vacuum in other parts of the world where those people are really feeling the collapse. Either way, there's half the people who are experiencing collapse. There's no one around. There's no people around me anymore. What's the point? This town is dying. These shops are closing down. And then there's the other half of people who are experiencing an influx of people that they don't share values with, and there's too many people. They're feeling cramped. They're feeling like their culture is being eroded. And what do they do about that, right? Either way, demographic collapse causes demographic pressure. So I've outlined ontological shock. I've discussed why it's happening, and this is stuff that a lot of people think about already. So let's go on to something new. Let's go on to the solutions. How do we move forward? Let's not just discuss the problems here or the challenges. Let's discuss the solutions and the possibilities, because that's really what makes the difference. I've written down here, slow down. I've just given you a lot of information, and you are swamped and inundated with information constantly. You're bombarded by notifications, by ads, by people messaging you out of nowhere for this, that, or in the other. Too much information causes you to speed up. All of a sudden, you're hardwired for survival, right? So all of a sudden you're taking all this information and there's overload. You're like, I have to act. It pressures you to act. I have to do something because the economy is collapsing. There's this, there's that problem. And so all of a sudden your nervous system is in survival mode, and it's constant. It's never actually relaxed. And so you're speeding up. So the alternative to that and the solution is simple: slow down. And that's the irony of life. The simplest thing is simultaneously the complicated thing. And the question is, how do I slow down? It's difficult. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to tell you, okay, just breathe, meditate, eliminate the stress from your life, maybe change jobs, maybe whatever it is. It's easy to just say those things. They're like throwaway things. The point is, how do we arrive at that? Is there a way that we can come together as a community to be more aware of it and to engender a culture that allows you to slow down? It's interesting because it's an illusion as well. If you slow down, you might feel like it's detrimental because you didn't land that client or the competition is getting ahead of you. But when you have actually slowed down and you've removed yourself from your situation for long enough, you start to realize that a lot of the things you thought you needed, you didn't need. That slowing down is actually what allowed you to be more productive. And that when you did less, that which you did had more impact. And so there's these things that we have to realize that we've lost. like knowledge as human beings when it comes to slowing down. So I'm not here to tell you how to slow down. I'm just trying to tell you that however you get there, getting there is going to be worth the squeeze. You'll realize in hindsight, wow, I was so lost and I was fueled by a system, by a culture, by the chaos into thinking that I need to make all these decisions. And of course, because you were making them out of fear and survival mode, you were making the wrong decisions. And that puts you in an even deeper hole that you weren't really expecting. As a global culture, that hole is existential crisis. It's ontological shock in a way that we're unprepared for. The next thing is we need to increase our rationality and our emotional temperance. It's kind of downstream from the slowing down thing, right? When you slow down, you have the cognitive ability to rationalize a little bit more and to be a little bit more calm in how you operate. So, emotional temperance, in other words, being well balanced, not control your emotions too much or your thoughts too much, just having a balance between your rationality and your emotion. The two balancing each other out causes you to make the right decisions, causes you to have well-being. And on the large scale, when enough people have a good balance there, it causes there to be balance and well-being on a societal and on a species level. And that's the real key to our survival here. Our survival has nothing to do with there being enough resources on the planet. It has nothing to do with there being a godly force that's here to save us. It has everything to do with us becoming higher in our level of awareness as individuals, because that eventually creates a higher awareness as a culture, and so that we can defeat the challenge of us defeating ourselves. We are the challenge. And so we have to turn inwards, not outwards. And in order to do that, you have to slow down. You have to sever the illusion that you have to operate out here in the world. We have to go inwards. And then finally, another solution to all of these problems, the solution to these challenges are the two new emerging industries, according to my opinion. I believe because there's a shift in labor, a shift in culture, in such a radical way that people are going to move forward feeling that there's no purpose to any of it, right? Especially when there's no jobs, there's no way to secure yourself any kind of meaning or even just financial gains or status, which is another thing that we chase. None of it matters anymore. So what's another industry? Well, we're seeing it already. It's called self-development, life coaching, philosophy, and what I think is going to eventually turn into purpose coaching. In a way, I do see myself as a pioneer of this new industry. I think, the Industrial Revolution, people went from the factories and then they transitioned into the service industry, restaurants and customer service and, things that have to do with more human-oriented activities. Now, the same transition, there's always a transition into a different job market that we create for ourselves because humans love to work. It's how we function. And the next thing is people, I think, helping people. There's going to be a push for a more human-based or human-centric level of activity, which is a gorgeous thing. I think it's a beautiful thing that if robotics takes care of all the menial tasks from us, then we can move on to doing things that are more human-centric, especially now that we've been so isolated by technology. It's about time that technology has evolved to start allowing us to reconnect on a human level, on a real level, right? People are going to create their own religions. There's going to be lots of cults. That'll be something that I think is more negative as well. People will try to control and it's like, I have the answers, right? And I'm the one who can help you feel like you have meaning. And this will be horrible. It'll end up in catastrophe as it always has. But there will be some good frameworks where people can help you navigate your experience as a human being, which leads me to the second industry, which I believe is going to be emerging and already is in some prototypical fashion, which is the creation of experiences, whether it's more analog, like you own a piece of land and you're going to turn it into a theme park or a natural reserve or a spa, or you're creating more virtual ones where you're allowing people to experience movies that are tailored to their own predilections in a virtual space, creating 3D art and experiences in ways that we still even can't conceptualize. That'll be, I think, what people will start to use as a platform upon which they can gain status. If there's some kind of economy, then money as well, and purpose. It'll be meaningful to say, wow, look at me. I created this great experience. It's like a mix between a video game and a movie, and I'm in this 3D world. Or I've created this fantastic little town where people can live there for 6 months at a time or whatever it is and experience what it's like to live in 13th century Japan. Either way, people are going to craft experiences as ways to create purpose and meaning for themselves. And that purpose is to create those experiences for others as well. And a lot of people are going to start to think to themselves, well, what's the point of having these experiences? I've gone through a lot of these different experiences now. I still don't feel like there's any direction in my life or that it's meant for anything. So that's the question of absolute purpose that's going to kick in, right? And that's why I think purpose coaches and self-development mentors and things like that are going to be so prominent, because they're going to have to help you navigate this expansion of freedom and experiences. Now, my personal worldview is that reality, let's personify it, is God, and God separates itself, fractionates itself into a bunch of limited forms. That's where all the different dimensions of physics comes. That's where all the separation of different materials comes, atoms and so on, and then that builds up to planets and living beings. There's an interaction happening with, it's one substance that has fractionated itself to have an interaction with itself in order to experience in a very short form way. I mean, I have a lot more to say on the topic. Is going to be the next thing that we can really attach ourselves to in order to experience purpose and meaning. And this isn't necessarily good or bad. It's going to be challenging either way. It's good in the sense that, hey, you're not forced into doing some mindless job, or you're not forced into perishing in the desert because there's no resources, right? All of this will start to change and we'll have more freedom. But freedom to experience things, it comes with a different set of challenges. It becomes very difficult to maintain that lifestyle, as we've seen time and time again. So we're going to have to try to become more sensitive and receptive to meaning. We're going to have to tap into the inherent meaning of experience itself. Not there has to be a specific experience that I need to achieve so that my life can be meaningful, right? Some theoretical, far away, impossible thing to achieve that I can always chase after, because you're going to tell yourself, well, if there's something that I can never achieve, what's the point? And so it's important for us to be receptive to the fact that there's inherent meaning in the universe. That's going to be the challenge. And that could be much more difficult in different ways than we think. Some people would rather struggle to survive and feed themselves by cultivating the land and things like that than have to deal with so much freedom. We can't make those judgments for other people or for ourselves. The only thing we can do is realize that this is the thing that we're going to have to struggle with, that we've been struggling with, in fact. What we're living through today is orders of magnitude down the line than we were in our human experience 200-300 years ago, even 50 years ago. No one would have or could have imagined that we would be doing all these things. They would have thought, well, that's magic, that's godly things. And now we are messing with these godly powers that allows us the freedom to do things, and we don't know how to use it. We don't know how to be, how to live with that freedom. So, purpose. We're going to have to turn our attention towards purpose, towards ourselves, our understanding of meaning and identity, and the ability to be receptive to meaning, to realize that there is inherent meaning in the universe. And some people are going to need that to be justified on a logical level. They have to have proof. And other people, it'll be sufficient only to tap into the ability to sense that meaning. And either way, I think that both are possible. I think that both are already here. And we just need to be aware of it and move together as a society to do it. So I'm going to end it with a few different questions for you. Do you have that little inner voice inside you that's saying, maybe this isn't what I should be doing? How long have you spent going down this road of trying to silence that voice that inner voice. In other words, to silence your true self just because you fear the repercussions, the consequences. Oh, what's going to happen if I leave my city? If I change my job? If I quit this relationship? If I change my circle of friends? I'm going to be alone. I'm not going to have any meaning. I'm not going to have any money. But that voice eventually becomes so loud that you start to self-destruct, and then you become so miserable and depressed and addicted that you forget why you are doing the very things you're doing to yourself to begin with. You forget that you even had those things to fear before. You're just so lost, utterly lost. So if that voice is still in you now, listen to it. Don't ignore it. Don't ignore it. I want to thank you for listening to this podcast today, this ontological shock theme. I want you to come away from this conversation, because it is a conversation. I might be speaking and you're listening, but internally you're having a dialogue with yourself about what you're listening to here. So this conversation should be something that you walk away from feeling renewed, feeling powerful, feeling as if though there's hope, because there is, and that there's real value. All right. And that the world isn't such a scary place, and that you can make a difference, and that there is meaning out there, and that your purpose is waiting for you at the bottom of all of that fear and all of that stuff that you've been ignoring. And that the more that you face yourself, the more you will be liberated. And the more that you will be liberated, the more that the freedom that you have coming to you with technology, with the different possibilities, won't be so difficult to handle anymore. You will be able to harness the freedoms that these technologies and these different opportunities bring you to play, instead of to dwindle down this downward spiral where you're destroying yourself in hedonism. That's the only difference between someone who has a lot of opportunities and resources and freedom, who can play with it and enjoy their lives, and someone who has the exact same stuff, but instead of playing, they're destroying themselves. The only difference is that they're in touch with who they are, they're well aligned with their most ideal purpose, and they are sensitive and receptive to the inherent meaning of reality. So I implore you to start that journey now, and that if there's anything you need in terms of help, I'm here, and your friends are there, and your family is there. Reach out, discuss, dig, discover, and we'll see you in the next one.